Can you imagine finding yourself in front of a serial killer and not understanding how much danger you're in until it's too late, and yet somehow walking away and living to tell the tale?
And make out a small beam of light against the mirror.
Truly weird stuff.
Once again, we are joined by People Magazine Investigates Alicia Dennis to take a deep dive into some of these stories on the series Surviving a Serial Killer, which is running new episodes on Investigation Discovery and streaming on Max. Let's talk about the Casanova Killer. It's kind of gross how in our society we give murderers snappy nicknames and turn brutal, inhumane crimes into entertainment. But the Casanova Killer, whose real name is Paul Knowles, now he is believed to have killed, I think it's 18 people, but he claims to have killed, he brags that he killed more than twice that many. And the woman who survived that is a single mom named Barbara Abel. Let's talk about Barbara.
Barbara's case is just shocking on so many levels. She comes home and finds a stranger inside her house. This guy is holding her sister hostage, and her sister has a disability. It's part of Barbara's life to take care of her sister. And so she immediately starts trying to bargain with this stranger. Leave my sister, take me. If you need to kidnap someone, let it be me. She's trying to have that happen incredibly quickly because she knows that at any moment her young son is going to be coming through the door home from school. And she doesn't manage to convince the stranger to take her fast enough, and her son does come home. And Paul Knowles says, well, I'm going to kidnap him. This is what I'm doing. And she begs him not to, and again, pleads with him to leave them alone and to take her. Please take her. Take me out of the house right now. She's already thinking of how she's going to manage to trick this guy, how she's going to manage to survive this and manage to protect her sister and her son at all costs. Somehow she does convince him to take her. And then the next phase of her survival is kicking into gear because she knows she has to come back and take care of them. There's no one to take care of her sister and son but her. And so her survival, her need to survive is not only for herself, but completely, as she's recalling this, for them. She's desperate to make sure that she lives for them. And so as she's kind of scrambling through her brain, because she can tell that this guy is intent on causing harm, if not, killing her, she decides to try to trick him into believing that she wants to be with him, that she's in love with him, that somehow she's fallen in love with him. And that's where the Casanova Killer comes in to some degree, where, he's this good-looking individual. This is something that he was described as to police, but she's, using his looks as a way to trick him and convince him that, of course, she's fallen in love with him at first sight, despite the fact that he's, tried to cause her harm. Of course, she would want to be with him and be in love with him. It's this turning the tables thing.
Her instincts regarding this man and what she needed to do for her own survival are so powerful. And I just want to highlight that because we all have that voice inside that says, you should leave now, you should go. Don't do this, don't do that. This person is unsafe. And we shout that voice down because we don't want to be rude or mean or bitchy or unfriendly or unladylike or whatever the million things are. And in the case of the Casanova Killer, his story is really bookended. At the beginning of his murderous career, he had been, if I recall, he was engaged to a woman in California, in San Francisco, And when they'd been pen pals while he was in prison, and when they met face to face, she was like, called off the wedding because she knew her instincts were screaming at her, there's something very wrong here. And he made all kinds of claims about what he did after that dumping, right? But his story began with this woman who said, no, all my spidey senses are tingling. This is a bad. And his story is ended with Barbara, who assesses the situation and understands instinctively the role she's got to play if she wants to walk out alive. That is such a powerful thing that we absolutely have to pay attention to and honor. Always.
Right. And she's feeding into his ego. She's imagining, how am I going to make him trust me so that he leaves me alone so that I can escape? This is like, how can I convince him that I am the person to be with and to trust, and I'm, here for you, and it's all that. What's so mind-blowing, guys, in this situation and in this case, which you will see in this episode, is that somehow she does manage to escape and immediately goes to authorities because of the survival technique she used, because she told him she was in love with him and she wanted to be with him, and she explained all this to the police. They were like, you did tell him that you loved him. This is going to be kind of a he said, she said kind of scenario. You said you were his girlfriend. You said you were. She's like, no. This was a stranger who was in my house trying to kidnap my family. I'm telling you, this is what happened. He's very dangerous. They bring him in. He charms them and they let him go. We talk to police now. We talk to investigators in this episode, and you will see the anguish and horror that they go through, that the case was handled that way then, that the case was not handled differently, that maybe they could have saved someone else's life if they had listened to Barbara. So there is Barbara, having told the police everything, having tricked this guy. He's not put behind bars, so she now has to live in fear that he's coming back to finish what he started and to silence her, because he's not brought to justice then. It's not until later that he is. And so I have to hope that the way that we listen to victims now has evolved and gotten better through the years, and that what happened to Barbara would not happen to a victim today, and that people are believed and listened to and things investigated in a different way, that there's video surveillance and I don't know, and ways to go and check all the different fingerprints of him inside her house, and that none of this would have happened today in this day and age. But that's just my hope.
But Alicia, too, I think that shows like this contribute to that evolution in the way we listen to victims and the way we understand perpetrators. Because, it's kind of a running joke that, the reason why, women love true crime is because we're getting trained on how not to become victims. We all know that story, right? Like, I watched Dateline, so it doesn't happen to me. But the awareness that people have now about how the system operates, how victims move through the system, how easily it is for a perpetrator to be dismissed with basically, well, you might be dramatic, or maybe that didn't happen just the way you thought it was. That's changing, I think, in large part because of the bright, hot light that these kinds of documentaries shed on the way these things happen.
Exactly. And Barbara, I can't imagine in that moment. She does describe it to us, and so you get to see some of it. But just putting yourself in her place, where you have somehow managed to come through this. You've saved your sister, you've saved your son, you've saved yourself, and you're out of the clutches of this monster, and you go to the place that you think you're going to be protected and saved. And they send you away.
We're talking with Alicia Dennis with People Magazine Investigates, and you can watch this Surviving a Serial Killer series. It is unbelievable. unbelievable. Max and I were just talking about the episode he watched. It's streaming on Max and airing new episodes on Investigation Discovery. And I have to tell you, the Gary Heidnik story, the man who calls himself the Bishop, is really close to home for us. Max and I are both from the area where this happened. So let's talk about this case and the fact that anyone survived. The fact that Josefina Rivera walked away from this is one of the more astonishing stories, I think, ever.
I agree with you. I feel that this case, all of these cases have obviously evil and some level of creepiness in them. But with this one, with Gary Heidnik, there's this other cult-like theme within it where people are coming to him. You know, he calls himself the bishop. He runs a church out of his house. And he's offering up some kind of, peace and enlightenment and fellowship. And that's what people think that they're embracing when they encounter him. And what's actually going on is there's a literal torture chamber in his house, in his basement, where he's capturing and has imprisoned up to 6 women there. And the fact that Josefina Rivera, you enter there of your own accord, I guess. You enter the house, but she realized very soon that no one was going to be able to leave alive. And she tries her best to figure out some way out.
The using of religion and this promise of some kind of salvation and peace as the lure for victims, it's next level.
It really is.
It's next level evil, next level exploitation. And what happened in Heidnik's home in Philadelphia, it crosses every boundary line that I think we have as human beings. Every single one.
Yeah, it does. And it's the case that, of course, the Silence of the Lambs movie and the character of Buffalo Bill is based loosely around that idea that the nightmare was so intense that it was something that even, Hollywood said, what is the most horrific serial killer scenario you can possibly imagine? And this is the one that they were connected to. And it's this, he built this own pit in his basement floor in Philadelphia. And just that idea that you can be walking through a neighborhood and seeing someone's house and thinking that you know them or what's going on in that house, and you have no idea in this case. I mean, it's just so mind-blowingly awful.
And the woman who survived Gary Heidnik, and it's astounding that anyone did, Josefina, so she was 25 years old when he abducted her in 1986, 25 years old. I mean, I think of myself at 25 years old, which of course was like 10 minutes ago, girl, but I think of myself
exactly, yes,
at 25 really years old and trying
same.
to imagine having the internal resources that she did in order to stay alive in not just in the fear, but in the unspeakable conditions in this basement pit. If you're unfamiliar with the Gary Heidnik case, one of the things he used to torture his victims was electrical shock. There were threats of cannibalism, and some evidence that did happen. And then he tried, of course, in March of '87 to get his only surviving victim, Josefina, to work with him as basically an accomplice in another abduction. Can we talk about that?
Well, yeah, I think that's so diabolical, really, where all of the horrible mind games that are going on and what happens to your brain circuits when you are being held against your will and you are being tortured. I don't know that we completely even understand what happens, we've talked to a lot of different survivors. We've talked to victims that have gotten to the other side of it. I'm sure, there's been a lot of research and things like that done, but there's no way of knowing how you're going to be affected particularly, specifically, and what that's going to do to you emotionally and obviously physically, all those things. So she's goes back and forth from imagining that she's never going to survive and that this is the way that she will die, to telling herself that she has to survive, and wondering if that's possible, if making him believe that she's working with him or having him trust her in this other way, this other level, which we see with some of these other survivors, trying to figure that out, trying to have the brain space to outthink the monster, is really, incredible to imagine.
How did she hang on to hope? That's something I've always wondered about her story. Because Gary Heidnik, he was caught. He was actually the last person executed in the state of Pennsylvania, the last person on death row in Pennsylvania. So justice was served. But how did she, all those endless hours and days that turned into weeks and then months, how did she manage to hold on to any hope at all, Alicia? Was she able to talk about that with you?
We do talk to her about that in the show. And again, we've talked before a little bit, Sheri, about the level of guilt that a lot of these survivors have. And in her case, she felt incredibly guilty. She was a mom of 3 and had struggled off and on with addiction in her life, and with, having drug problems and that kind of thing. And so there was this part of her that felt like, I'm to blame in some way. I'm to blame for being targeted, or I'm to blame for falling underneath this person's, clutches. It's my fault somehow. And I think the combination of her strength and thinking, I've got to get out of this for my kids, for myself, but then she really believed that she could possibly save the women that were still alive. There were women that were being held captive that he had not killed yet, and she knew that he would. She had every confidence that he was just waiting for whatever time or whatever mood, I guess, would come over him, or whatever, he felt. And so she knew that it was not only her that she could save by trying to gain his trust and convince him of that she could maybe save other people. And, she ultimately did, which is incredible.
It's such a powerful thing to think about, as human beings, because we get frustrated with each other because we can be so terrible. But it wasn't just her own life that motivated her to stay alive. It was this knowledge that there were others that she could help, that people counted on her. A purpose outside of yourself, giving you the strength that you didn't know you were capable of, is maybe the only beautiful thing you can find in this terrible, terrible tale.
Exactly. And it reminds me a little tiny bit of the Ariel Castro kidnappings out of Cleveland
in Ohio.
Where those women, those girls, young women, were captured and held captive for such a long time. And that idea that when one was being treated just a little bit differently and allowed upstairs and not chained in the basement with a helmet on, that she did somehow escape. She did somehow escape, and her escape led to the others being freed too. And in Josefina's case, her being able to go to police and tell them what had happened and what was happening made it so that not only, as we've already said, not only she walked out, but 3 other victims did too.
So one of the details in the Heidnik case that got a little bit lost in the comparison to Buffalo Bill and the absolutely vile evidence that was found on scene, I remember reading years ago an interview with Josefina where Gary Heidnik had told her when he abducted her, he had her like shackled like with handcuffs to a radiator in this hole in his basement. And he told her that the state, he wanted to have children and he had children, but the state kept taking them away. And he had come up with a way where he could have all the children he wanted, and nobody could take them. And he told her, "You're going to have my baby down here in this filthy, dirty pit, in this basement, in this rundown house in Philly." And he said, "And I got more girls down here, and they're going to have my babies too." And I remember that she told the reporter in that, she said, he wanted a baby farm. And the way that that stayed with me and haunted my nightmares. I mean, when you think about all the levels of crazy and dysfunction that are in this one perpetrator, you know, think about that. And that one gets lost because people remember, what they remember is the detail of law enforcement finding human flesh in the cooking pots upstairs. And so that kind of overshadowed the larger diabolical plan that these women weren't even human to him. These were not people. These were just, breeding animals that he could do with as he pleased, and torture. They had no humanity, which makes Josefina's survival that much more remarkable because she found every tiny crack there was and pushed it a little wider and a little wider. And that's why she's alive to tell her story.
You're right. He was someone that he had spent his entire life tricking people. He had spent his entire life convincing people of what it was that he wanted them to see. When he was in the Army for a time as a medic and had been stationed in Germany. He didn't like the assignment there and wondered how he could beat it without there being repercussions, and managed to convince everyone around him that he needed a medical discharge and that he had mental illness. The prosecutor at the time, Charlie Gallagher, I think it was, told reporters at the time that he's been faking an identity his entire life. He's been faking different personas his entire life. And so this was something like, from this bishop to, him pretending to be a religious man, to him having all these other things that he was trying to convince people of. It's something that he'd been doing for a long time, and he was very good at it.
And her instincts, and we talk a lot about that voice, and trusting your gut. Her instincts were so sharp, and what her instincts told her to do was so repugnant, but she understood this was how to survive. I remember reading once that she said, "I figured out that Gary Heidnik was lonely, and that's why he felt like he wanted all those babies so he'd never be lonely again. So I knew I had to trick him into thinking that I was his partner and that he would never be alone again, that I would always be with him." Girl, imagine yourself in that situation. Imagine swallowing down your terror and your repulsion in order to do that, to stay alive.
Exactly. And that's what she was able to do. And it just speaks not only to her strength, but the survival instincts that she had, and then her willingness to see that all the way through, right? And then be able to be clear enough with the police that they were, able to bring him to justice. But yeah, it's just such a crazy, crazy case. And the idea that it was just like in a neighborhood like yours and mine. And, you just don't know what was going on there in that church in his house.
What did you, after sitting down with her for so much time and talking in such depth about this. What did you come away with? Who is she today?
I think in some ways, she's the same person she was then, in that strength that she has and that has only really grown in her. I think that she's continued to struggle in her life. And this is something that, while she will not let it define her and will not let it be the only narrative of her existence or the only thing that people think about when they think of her, at the same time, this is something that's with her every day. There's just no way around it. It's something that will be a shadow over her no matter how brightly she shines. It's still there. And that's just something you can't take away as much as you'd want to. There's not that, eraser to make it go. At the same time, I think her being in this series with us and her sitting down and going through it all in the way that she does is part of her path to making sure that other victims don't feel alone, and that whatever pain that she suffered, that it helps other victims know that they are not crazy, or that it's possible to go on and live a life even though you're feeling so overwhelmed by the darkness. That she's really an example of how you can get to the other side of it.
Y'all, you have got to trust your gut instincts. That little voice that's telling you that this is a bad situation, a bad person, and you need to get gone. Always, always listen to that. We'll see you next time on True Weird Stuff.
And if you listen to us on Apple Podcasts, hit the plus button in the top right corner, and now it helps an independent podcast like ours to get discovered. And we really appreciate it if you subscribe, rate, and review True Weird Stuff.
Hit our website, trueweirdstuff.com, for show notes and photos and videos when we have it, and bonus content. Everything True Weird is waiting for you at trueweirdstuff.com.
And follow True Weird Stuff on Instagram and Twitter.
True Weird Stuff is a Now Media production. Our executive producer is Anthony Garcia. The show is written and hosted by me, Sheri Lynch, along with my deeply weird director, Max Sweeten. Our equally odd producer is Carrie Bowser. Additional production by the mysterious Stephen Call. Our digital witch and social media cult leader is Heather Furr. Original graphics by Kevin Nash. Original artworks by Olivia Axlin. True Weird original music composed and performed by Jack Griffin and Zane Nash. Copyright 2024 Now Media. All rights reserved. All wrongs remembered.